We're about to enter into this next session of This Way Up, and it's called An Injury to One is an Injury to All. And the reason we called it that was this year in exhibition has been extremely stressful and difficult for any number of reasons, and the future looks uncertain, even with the the green shoots that have been grasped at this morning. But what is certain is that the collective approach and the idea of working together has been extremely important in gathering our forces, making the argument of the importance of cinema, but also bringing to light some of the issues that exist within our industry that need dealt with. So this can be from right across the sector, from individual freelance workers to venues, to governance, to management, to issues right across the board. So this year, the TWU team decided that we would bring together two organisations that are set up to help and to support workers and to support the industry in making our working conditions better. Cinema is, as we say, a collective enterprise, and it's important that the collective impulse in helping each other and looking out for each other is emphasised. So I am delighted to be joined by, at some stage, via the gift of the internet, Douglas Mcgill from BECTU. There's Douglas there. Douglas, you've gone into black and white.
Yes.
It looks very
happening there.
Looks very cinematic, and we can hear you well.
Very gothic.
And also Joe Schofield from the Film and Television Charity. Hello, Joe.
Hi there.
You can hear us okay down the line?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Okay, good stuff. Maybe it might be just useful, Joe and Doug, just to introduce yourselves. So, Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Joe Schofield. I work for as you said, I work for the Film and Television Charity. I'm the hub manager for the north of England, so I've got a big remit covering a lot of geography. I'm also based in the north. I'm between Leeds and Manchester in Saddleworth, which is kind of over in the hills. And I've got, I come from a production background, so I've got about 15, 16 years in television drama. So really passionate about the industry and about supporting people in it.
Thanks, Joe. And Doug, do you want to give us a quick introduction?
Yes, I'm Doug Mcgill. I'm the organising official for BECTU, who covers Scotland and the north of England normally. Recently, due to illness, I've been covering Northern Ireland as well, which is why I've come along to this session. I have been the organising official for BECTU for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I worked for Scottish Opera, so my background is in theatre. I've been working in from the theatrical side since 1990, so I've been around for quite a long time. If I could just say a few words about what BECTU is. BECTU is the trade union that represents people in broadcasting, entertainment, communications and theatres, which includes cinemas as well. We consider ourselves to be the union for the creative ambition. We represent over 45,000 staff, contract and freelance workers in the media and entertainment industries across the whole of the UK. Our members work in non-performance roles like broadcasting, film and cinema, digital media, independent production, leisure, IT and telecoms, and of course theatre and the arts. Our members are ambitious even when they face uncertainty and precarious conditions in their career. As a union, we're ambitious too. We will support members when something goes wrong at work, and will stand up for their rights and to protect their jobs. Obviously, during the pandemic, it's been a very, very difficult time for people in our industries, and we're doing all that we can to support people, both financially, but also with advice and things as well. So when we come to this, sorry.
Doug, I was just going to break in there. Would you? We're going to pause for a bit. If you could maybe log off.
Yeah.
And then our tech people are going to come to you and just kind of make sure that, because that there's a bit of a strobe effect on your camera. Okay. So if you log off,
I'll log off and just log back on.
They'll give you a phone.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. It was a bit like being inside a German nightclub, which is not the effect we're going for. So Joe, we'll just carry on. I mean, one of the things we wanted to do was just outline what both Film and TV and BECTU have done since COVID hit. Maybe you could give us a quick rundown of what your approach has been? I mean, there's been a huge amount of work, but it's useful for us to know, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably useful as well for people to understand that the charity has got a 100-year-old history, and actually started as a charity that supported exclusively the cinema industry and distribution and exhibitions. It was started by the founders of people like Rank Cinema, this kind of small collective of very wealthy cinema people back in the day. So we've got this history that we bring with us. And while the title is Television and Film Charity, actually we also support cinema and anybody connected to cinema. So just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, obviously it's been an incredibly challenging year for all aspects of our industry. We have responded with some force to that, most notably, I think, with our COVID response package. We fundraised just short of £7 million this year, which we have given back to industry across the 3 sectors that we support. Most recently, we've done something called the Recovery Fund, which is awarded hundreds of people with a monthly income across 6 months to really try and support people, you know, with the uncertainty going into 2021. And we've also
just ask who those people are would be useful, maybe.
Really mixed background of people. So we've got people from cinema, clearly going through a really, really tough time. People from television, from film, from different areas of TV, film and cinema. So it's quite a diverse set of people who've been awarded those funds. But we've also done a couple of others as well. At the beginning of just after the first lockdown earlier this year, we did a COVID response that gave out grants to people. And we've also done something called the Community Fund, which is really looking at groups who are already facing increased barriers around the industries that we work in. So that's people who are underrepresented, have caring responsibilities, come from outside of London. So that's been quite a focused fund in itself, because we recognise that it's not just COVID that people are struggling with at the moment. It's a complex situation for many people. We do offer lots of other things, and I'll give you a really quick run through because I could be here for a long time talking about what we do.
We've got time, and I think the principal idea is to get information across, so that this is really useful.
Brilliant. So we offer a range of grants and support. We have something called a one-off grant, which, say, for instance, your fridge breaks down and you are a freelancer, you don't know when you're going to get paid next. That's where we can step in to help. So we'll cover up to £500. If your need is short-term and essential, then we can step in and we can cover those. We will also look at things like childcare. If you are on a job and you can't cover the childcare costs for that interim, then we can step in and try and help with that as well. We have lots of other resources. We've got something called Together All, which is a free to access resource around mental health. We have caseworkers where we offer bespoke one-to-one support for people who are vulnerable. And that's a 3-month package of support where we will work directly with you to get you back on your feet and to try and give you some direction towards work and where you want to go. And quite often with those particular cases, there are lots of other issues going on for people, which again, we can support you with. So it's not just about throwing money at the problem, it's actually trying to understand what the issues are and how we can support you through that so you can stay in the industry. We have the hubs, obviously, which I'm part of that. It's very important for the charity that we have a network outside of London and that we understand the nations and regions. And it's not just a kind of London-centric view of the industry of cinema, of film, of television. We really understand what's going on beyond that. And that's a big part of my remit. I need to keep my ears to the ground. I need to understand what the issues are, and I need to understand also what the differences are outside of London, of which they are many. And then just to touch on a couple of other things that I can talk about further into our chat, we have got something called the Whole Picture Programme, which is a major piece of work that will look at culture change within the industry. And that's a 2-year programme that's striving to increase a better mental health for people across the sectors that we represent. We did a piece of research last year called The Looking Glass, which really did reveal quite staggering numbers in terms of this mental health crisis that is going on in our industry. And this piece of work has got a number of stakeholders, broadcasters, big corporate names attached who've contributed financially, but also really made a commitment to being a part of this change. And we have stakeholders on board with that. So that's a really quite a phenomenally large piece of work that we're undertaking and should have some real positive change.
We'll maybe get on to kind of what the future looks like, I suppose, or what the plans of both organisations are.
Absolutely.
Doug, welcome back. You now look as though you're not trapped in an episode of X, which is good.
Absolutely no idea what was going on, but it's working now. So
no, you look well. Joe was just taking us through what film and TV charity have offered, since the COVID situation arose. Joe, was there anything else before we move on to Doug and BECTU?
The only thing I would add is that we also offer we recognise talent development, and we do something as well called the JBAs, or the John Brayborn Awards, and that's for developing talent in the industry. And we've just run something called the CV Clinic out of the hubs, which tries to match industry experts with participants to give them one-to-one advice and guidance around CV building and building networks. So we recognise that you need lots of different ways to support people, and a quick fix of money or a quick fix of a phone call is not necessarily sufficient. It works for some people, but not for all. And so I have to say this before we move on to Doug. We also have a 24/7 helpline. So we recognise that people do need to sometimes ring confidentially and speak to people. And I'll give out the number at the end of this. But that's an important part of the support that we offer as well, to understand that there is somebody there 24 hours a day if needed.
Yeah, it's a tremendous service, and yes, we'll come back to that, and we'll also make sure that we get that across all the delegates as well, and so that they can spread the word as well. Doug, thanks for your patience with that technical stuff there. Just to return to the initial question, since COVID hit in March, how have BECTU been sort of approaching the issue, if you like?
Well, what would be there's kind of two strands to it, really, isn't it? Obviously, over 50% of our members are freelancers. So one of the big concerns for us has been people who've been falling through the gaps in the various support schemes. So we've been lobbying the Chancellor and the DCMS really quite hard, in conjunction with the other, what we call Federation of Entertainment Unions. So that's like the Musicians Union, Equity, etc. as well, working together and working with the TUC and the other trade union councils across the nations and regions of Britain as well. So we've had some successes. Still major concerns for a lot of people falling through the gaps, and we were lobbying hard for furlough to be extended. Now, we won't take credit for it being extended, but we're grateful that it has been extended. However, we're still, let's say, quite upset that some of the issues we identified in the first round of furlough haven't been fixed, and there are still people who are not receiving support. The other people we've been working hard with are people like the BFI and the UK Cinemas Association as well. And we have, I'm glad to say, got a very good working relationship with them. So we're, as it were, singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to supporting people in our industries as well. So that's positive. The types of things we've been lobbying for are obviously fixing the gaps in the support and extending the furlough. But we're also looking at, with other trade associations and expertise within the union, safe return to work practices and guidances as well. So on the website, we've got industry-specific guidance, which produced in conjunction with organisations like the Association of British Theatres for theatre workers. We've been working hard in cinemas as well. We've been supporting our members who work in cinemas in terms of advising them in what the return to work risk assessment should be covering, what the government's guidance is for dealing with the public, food and things as well. And that was all going quite well until everything shut down again.
Yeah.
It was sort of back to square one. However, we've learned from the experience and what we had in place for when cinemas were able to open. We'll come back in at the drop of a hat when we start reopening again as well.
Yeah.
What is confusing for people, and it's particularly confusing for somebody like me who covers different nations and different regions within the United Kingdom, is they have different tier systems. And the tier systems change from region to nation. And so at one point a month ago, I had one cinema open in Dunfermline in Scotland, and that was the only one. And then the day after, I was speaking to the HR department at Odeon, it closed as well.
Yeah.
It's trying to keep track of these shifting sands and things as well.
Yeah.
But what obviously we're able to do is we've got contacts in the various governments. An example, for example, in Scotland, there was what was called the newly self-employed support scheme.
Yeah.
That managed to produce some grants for people who fell into that particular category. And with Creative Scotland and BECTU working together, we actually administered the applications for the grants and helped, as it were, dish out the money to people who we felt were deserving of it. So that was individual grants of £2,500 to people working in self-employed status as well. We've had a very similar scheme in Wales as well. I've been speaking to, or one of my colleagues has been speaking to the Arts Council for Northern Ireland, and hopefully we're about to start a dialogue on how we can help them support self-employed workers in a similar manner to what's happened in other parts of the United Kingdom.
Well, speaking from a Northern Irish perspective, that's much needed as well, Doug. I was speaking to Joe about it in terms of infrastructure in different parts of the UK is not as developed as others. And Joe, just to come back, you cover all four nations as well, don't you? The Film and TV charity is active in all four, yeah? Absolutely,
yeah. We cover the whole of the UK. So all of the things that I've talked about today is available to everybody in those four nations that you mentioned. And it's something that I'm quite keen to do as well, is to just highlight that we're not a charity who are solely based in London, who are offering this level of support to people in England. It's not the case. Right. It's very much open to all.
That's quite interesting. Doug, we've just had a question about what percentage of the workforce are actually union members?
Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea. No. However, we have a large membership, and people out with our sectors don't really know who BECTU is, but people within film, television, and theatres really do know who BECTU is. I mean, we really are quite a well-known organisation, and we have recognition agreements with hundreds of employers up and down the United Kingdom as well.
So, in terms of if somebody joined a workforce, started working at an independent, I'll rephrase that. Sometimes for people who aren't involved in the union movement and don't really know much about the union movement, the idea of who can be a union member and do you need a certain amount of union members in a particular workforce in order to become affiliated and so on and so forth. Can put ourselves in the shoes of an 18-year-old cinema worker who gets a job at a cinema, and they're not quite sure how to find out how to become a union member or to get involved in the union. What's the best steps to go through that?
Well, the first thing to do is to join. A young person we would consider to be a new entrant into the industry, so there's special offers available for younger people joining. If they join and their workplace doesn't have a recognition agreement, which is unfortunately quite common for cinema workers, they'll find that somebody like myself will be designated to follow up their membership, find out where they're working. I'll be able to identify if there's anybody else who's a member who is within that workplace and put them in touch with them. If we've got somebody who's done one of our accredited training courses for representatives within the workplace, then that would be the first point that we would point them towards. If there's not, then we would be, as full-time officials, available to speak to people. The way our branches work is if we've got accreditation and a recognition agreement within a workplace, then that would be a branch, and there would be a structure with a branch chair and a branch secretary, etc. If we don't, which as I say is quite common, so I touched on Odeon earlier, we have a number of members who work in Odeon up and down the country, so we can collectivise them and put them in touch with one another.
Yeah.
We have what's known as a divisional committee which covers cinemas, and that meets every quarter. It's been meeting more recently, where our reps and activists can get to know one another and attend meetings and support one another and run campaigns together as well.
So there are networks for people who, because I think we talked about mental health and Joe's mentioned that isolation in a workplace and the feeling that you're on your own with your troubles can be a big issue. But it is interesting that you're running kind of networks that people who aren't necessarily at affiliated or recognised venues can at least contact and be with each other.
Yes, that's very much the case. Mm-hmm. And members, we do training courses and support courses as well for things like mental health and things as well. There's a whole range of things in the background. It's what we try and do in normal times, actually go out and meet people in workplaces to discuss the benefits of being in a union. It's not just terms and conditions and pay. We do offer a hell of a lot of other services in the background as well.
Well, yeah, I think that's an important part of union membership that people don't necessarily understand. I think very often the union is always fighting against perception.
Yes.
For people who aren't union members, the perception is very much from 1970s TV, as opposed to the reality of kind of benefits and collective support, I suppose, as well in terms of.
One of the things that the pandemic has actually enabled us to do is organise more effectively, because Zoom calls and things as well. So rather than having a meeting at the head office in London where people have to travel and overnight accommodation and things, which is difficult for people obviously to spare the time, because we can do it on Zoom, we've had really very, very well attended sessions. When I touched on health and safety, when we started looking at safe return to work systems and things as well, I held a couple of webinars and there was 200 people who were just ordinary workers from cinemas who wanted to know how it affected them and what the future was going to look like. When I rejoined, I was hearing you talking about we don't really know what the future is going to look like at the moment, but we're, forewarned is forearmed, as we say. We're prepared for it, and we're working on different scenarios to help people return to work and to communicate with one another.
Joe, Doug just mentioned the future there. That's was it the whole picture program? Is very interesting. Obviously, it's early days, I think. Is that right? Yeah, but it would be very interesting to hear more about it.
Yeah, it's relatively early days, but there's a fair bit of momentum with it already. I think it's just interesting, touching on what Doug was talking about then, that our charity has had just the uptake in some of the services we offer have increased hugely this year because of COVID. So we're experiencing something similar to what Doug was talking about there with BECTU in terms of people coming to the door who perhaps wouldn't normally think about the services that we are offering. And I think that's really reflective of where people are at and how people are feeling currently. The whole picture programme, as I mentioned, springboarded from a large piece of research that we did called The Looking Glass last year, which looked at the industries that we support. And what came out of that was a clear picture of the mental health crisis, with some really quite startling numbers in terms of in terms of increased issues around mental health compared to the rest of the UK population, which are unique to theatre, film and cinema.
Is there maybe again it's early days, but is there a reason for that? Is it the precariousness of working? Is it
I think it's absolutely that. I think it's a large proportion of the workforce in TV, film, and cinema are freelance. I think that provides a lot of increased stress. There's also culture that needs to be addressed within those industries around things like bullying. There's a lack of access, which boils down to people facing additional barriers. We've obviously had Black Lives Matter this year, which has really highlighted the historic kind of issues around racism and representation and how that impacts on people's careers, and it's not well represented within the industry that we support. So lots of different things, but really about the makeup of the industry and the pressures that throws on people. So from that, we then had a sort of call to arms, and the Whole Picture programme came about. And as I said, there are a number of big stakeholders who've not only contributed financially, but are part of shaping what this programme will look like. We have lots of other areas within this programme where we can get viewpoints from people who are on the ground. So it's a programme that's really about shared dialogue. It is about taking views and reacting accordingly. So it should be kind of a living, breathing piece of work that will reflect the industry. And it's about challenging poor mental health practices which impact on people, and showing an alternate way that we can go forward. We're also currently shaping a big piece of work around anti-bullying, which will include things like an online platform and services where people they have a central place to go if they're experiencing bullying in the workplace.
That obviously has been a big issue this year. Not mentioning any government ministers, but the wider kind of the context of how workers can engage in a workplace and what they can find and what help they can find.
And I think as well, because it's a largely freelance community of workers, it's that much more difficult to understand what you do or where you go if you do experience negative behaviour in the workplace. There isn't always a straight, direct route to HR. People are constantly looking ahead about where their next job might be, and that impacts on how people feel they can report or do something about it. And even if you're not freelance, if you're on a PAYE, for example, you're quite often going from contract to contract, so you are still dealing with the same issues of going from week to week as a freelancer. So we're looking at all those quite complex issues and trying to put forward some real change within industry that will be positive. So that's where we are with the Whole Picture programme, and as I say, it will be a really important piece of work, I think, for the industry at large. And running alongside that, we have obviously done our COVID response packages, which I've talked about, which is, the fundraising, the response that we've had for that has really been incredible.
It's interesting.
This year.
You mentioned stakeholders. The kind of response in terms of the BFI and Netflix, and I think there were another couple of organisations. Is there a sense from, should we say, the purse holders, the people who are making money out the other end of people's work, should we say, are taking notice and feeling that they have a responsibility?
I think so. If that can be reflected in monetary terms, then we have had support this year from BBC Studios, Channel 4, Viacom, Netflix. There's a long list of names who have approached the charity and have said, what can we do? How can we support these industries who are really struggling this year, and the people who who make these industries happen and create the content and open the cinemas and get movies made. You know, there is an acknowledgement there, I think, that it's had a crisis this year, and that that support is needed. I mean, certainly we couldn't have raised the amount of money that we fundraised this year without that acknowledgement and commitment. And all of those things will go to support people directly. I mean, that's what that money is going to be used for and has been used for. But just to touch again on some of the things that I recapped earlier, alongside of all this work, what we have going forward as well into the future are these existing support strands that we do offer, which is a helpline where people do have somebody to call. And actually that helpline isn't just about confidentially being able to have a chat to somebody. The helpline offers legal advice. There's a free route to counselling through that helpline. There's actually lots of different things that we can support people with. If you do need more bespoke one-to-one advice for a kind of a 3-month package of support, we can direct you towards that as well through our helpline. So it's just a really fantastic resource, and I'm very keen for people to understand it's there. It's free to access if people need it. And as I said, it's not just it is for everybody. It is for all 4 nations. We have things like the one-off grants exactly as well.
Yeah, I was just going to move on to freelancers. Actually, I mean, obviously, we've talked about freelancers in this conversation, but it's a wider issue around where freelancers sit in our own industry, but also, I mean, society-wide as well. I mean, Doug, you'd mentioned that you have a lot of contact with freelancers and you have members who are freelancers. I mean, what do you identify as the major issues for freelancers out there at the moment?
It's just the precarious nature of freelance work. Joe kind of touched on some of the things that we've been working on, and there's a lot of overlap between what Joe does and what we do. Yep. An example would be, the feast and famine nature of freelance work is you're constantly worrying about where your next job's going to be, and is there another job going to be there? And that we find through our surveys and listening to our members that leaves people more susceptible to being bullied or being mistreated within the workplace, because they're less likely to stand up to bad behaviours because they fear it will affect their ability to get work, like they'll go on a blacklist or they'll have a bad name as being somebody who's difficult.
Can I ask, are there still blacklists out there? Is that sort of thing still happening, do you reckon?
There's not supposed to be, but there is a perception amongst our members that if they are deemed to be misbehaving, then word gets out amongst other employers and producers.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I agree, Doug. It's more to do, it's a perception. I mean, I've been a freelancer for many years, and you don't want to be perceived as somebody who's difficult. You want to be able to do your job well, smile, and then make it easy for you to be rehired.
Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, just this week, on Monday and Tuesday, I got 2 inquiries from 2 separate members working on completely different productions, both of whom the first thing they said was, "Can you help me and keep this anonymous?" Because they didn't want their employer to find out they were having issues. One of them was to do with not being paid correctly. And you kind of wonder, how do you support somebody by making a query on their payslip without revealing who they are? And the other one was somebody who was complaining about people smoking in the studio. And it was people, one of them was the director and one of them was the senior camera operator. And they were scared to stand up to these people in case it meant that they didn't get awarded work again in the future.
Yeah.
And it may seem trivial, but one of the people that referred to me as his father is currently dying of lung cancer. And they have very, very genuine concerns and upset by these behaviours. But they just get laughed at.
Yeah.
It happens all the time, and so what we see the benefit of being a trade union, a member of a trade union, is there is somebody you can turn to. You're not on your own. So we encourage people to talk to one another, but we provide support in the background for people. Yeah. So if they have an issue, they can come to us and they can get reassurance and they can get some support. What we also do as well, which is not so widely known, is we work with employers to try and improve conditions as well. In terms of diversity, just before the lockdown, we were making really good progress in the theatre world in helping employers and HR departments change the way they look for new members of staff. Rather than putting an advert in the Guardian or the Stage, which is the traditional place to do it, is they might want to put adverts in some of the local press. Yeah. So we had good successes in Bradford, for example. And what we found in Bradford was there's a huge community in Bradford who make wedding outfits for the Asian community. Right. Extremely intricate, difficult costume making skills that people have. And they'd never, either side of the community had ever considered that as being something that could transfer over to theatre work or to film costume making as well. So we made some really good progress with that as well.
I mean, with freelancers, is it a case that, people were happy to look the other way in terms of the precariousness and in terms of the working conditions and the mental health issues because the work was still rolling in? And actually now we've come to the situation where it's dried up completely. The isolation that a lot of freelancers have and the difficulties a lot of freelancers have now been writ large. The sort of pandemic is actually, it's like a sea drying out. You suddenly see the bottom of the reality of what's underneath.
Yes. I mean, I think it's really highlighted how precarious some of these positions and some of these roles really are. And it's not just freelancers as well. Within cinemas, we've got some of the big chains who use the 0 hours contract model. These people have just been written to and said, we don't have any work for you. So there's no redundancy, there's no payoff, there's no guarantee there'll be work to come back to. They've just been told there's no shifts at the moment. We'll be in touch at some point in the future. And
they have no comeback really legally?
No recourse in law. And what we've been encouraging, and we've had some success in the cinema world with chains, is that if you put people on a minimum hours contract, say 6 or 8 hours a week, means they've got security of employment and they can, they're entitled to get employment rights, which people in 0 hours contracts don't get.
Yeah.
And if you do a minimum 8 hour contract and it's flexible, so actually about 8 hours a week, 32 hours a month, so you can work 16 hours one week and not so much the other. And people who choose 0 hours contract because the flexibility suits their home life or their studying, if they're students and things, they can have that bit of flexibility, but at least they still have employment rights and something to fall back on.
Joe, we've had a specific question just about the financial support packages. So can you confirm if the charity's mental health and financial support packages are available for cinema workers and specifically house staff, front of house staff? That's from Dana.
Yeah, it's open to cinema workers. The COVID recovery package, that's actually closed now. So we've, those awardees have been made. And that was on the awardees were based on a scale where need was analysed with the application. So it had a kind of a slightly different criteria attached to it. But certainly if you work in cinema and you want to use our helpline or you want to inquire whether you'll be eligible for a one-off grant, or any of the other kind of support elements that we offer, then absolutely, yeah, it's open to people in cinema. Some of the awards that we do have got specific criteria attached to them, such as a recovery grant for COVID, but that's on a grant by grant basis. So I would encourage everybody to to go to the website. All the details of what we offer are on there, and when something is launched, then the details of how to apply and to look at eligibility is on there. But we represent people who work in cinema as well as film and television.
Okay.
I would just say to your question as well, in terms of
freelancers,
in terms of what has sort of COVID done in terms of freelancers. I mean, it's hard to find a positive because of the situation that we're in. But if anything, I think it's given us a kind of ground zero to really, the whole of production stopped earlier this spring, which is quite incredible. And while production has started again, it's got to be COVID secure. And its sets are not the same. They're not as they were, and there are still restrictions in place. Obviously, with cinemas, we're still in a position where they're closed, or many of them are closed. But it has stopped the clock, I think. And there's an opportunity where we can actually look at the sector and sectors, and then actually work out what is the best way to go forward with this. Do we fall back onto old habits, or do we actually pause, have a moment of reflection, and then look at how we can best serve the people who work in these industries? And I think, if anything, it's given us that opportunity. And if we don't make the most of that by working together, then it is a missed opportunity, and it would be, a real crying shame for the people who make our industry as fantastic as it is. And pre-COVID, actually the cinema sector was, and television production rather, was just unprecedented in terms of output. So it's a really thriving. It's thriving, and when things return, it will thrive again. But we do need to look at those practices.
It's the structure and practices. I mean, Doug, in terms of lobbying, and how BECTU are following up with, when we come back, what it's going to look like. I mean, have they been reaching out to government and to organisations to try to get them to think about how things might be when we come back?
Yes, well, like as Joe was saying, I mean, it's an opportunity. We're looking at this as potential an opportunity to refocus and to remove some of the bad habits that have been endemic with our industries in terms of employment conditions and things as well. What we're talking about within BECTU, and we're reaching out to our members as well, is some sort of new deal. So what does the future look like? What should we be putting in place into contracts and working conditions that improve on what we had before, rather than falling back to old dodgy practices? It's going to be a bit of a struggle, because some organisations are holding their hands up and say it has to go back to the way it was before. Other organisations are more enlightened, and they're looking at better ways of moving things forward as well. One of the things that has been really quite interesting for the trade union movement as a whole is when the Prime Minister and the Chancellor refer to working with trade unions in moving forwards. I mean, this is a Conservative government, for goodness sake. When did we ever hear that before? So there are positives out there that we intend to sort of pick up on and move forwards. Our driving ambition is that the new normal is not the same as the old normal. It's different, and it's better, and people are more secure. Because I'll give a wee example. Quite a lot of businesses that we deal with have been coming along to ask to vary contracts for people to include what they call layoff clauses.
Right.
Because what they found is the pandemic wasn't covered. So when they had to lay people off, they still had to get paid. So smaller businesses, independent productions are now looking to insert a layoff clause, which means should another pandemic come round, then people can get dropped but not be supported financially. So we're obviously highlighting that and fighting that as strong as we possibly can, because it's inherently unfair. It's like putting the financial burden gets put onto the workers rather than the employer, and that doesn't seem right.
I mean, there seems to be so many practices within organisations. I know very often, issues around how an organisation will develop policy, and then yet and yet then not adhere to that policy and not see it's working through, those kind of things. I mean, my own union background is in libraries. And that was, that was a very difficult situation where people would develop policies, but then never read them again. You would get into a situation, bring the policy, blow the dust off it, and then, and people would realize that, it wasn't there. So, I suppose it's that case of organizations like yourselves holding people to account, that if we are developing diversity, if we are developing mental health services and awareness of mental health for workers and things like that those things are then kept to by venues and organizations and so on.
It's interesting to say about, dusting down some of these things. A few years ago, the STUC and the Scottish Government pulled together what's called the Fair Work Framework. Mm-hmm. That was like minimum, terms and conditions and practices and recognising trade unions in the workplace and bargaining and things as well. And that was all lauded at the time, but actually it doesn't really happen in practice. So what we are trying to do, and we're having some success, is in the regularly funded bodies, like they get Arts Council grants and things like that as well. We're trying to build in that as a condition on receiving the grant that you implement the Fair Work Framework.
Right.
And it's not been totally dismissed. It's been considered, and that we think that's important, because if that actually becomes a condition of receiving a grant, that you treat your workers fairly and give them fair contracts, then that has to be an improvement on where we were before. Yeah,
and also it's I suppose to a certain extent it brings a transactional thing, which a lot of senior management understands. They understand transactional kind of exchanges. We'll treat you well if you give us some money, sort of thing. Yeah. I don't know what lobbying areas the film and TV charity work in, but in terms of mental health, it seems to be something that you will be championing, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, we're very much about developing a positive way forward for mental health in the industry. We're not really a lobbying organisation, and we don't have political affiliations. However, we are an organisation that represent kind of best practice for the industry, and we are, our focus is about supporting people, and mental health is obviously an absolutely fundamental part of that, particularly given the research that we uncovered last year, which pointed very clearly to an issue, to a serious problem with mental health, with the sectors that we represent. So yeah, there is a real investment from our point of view in mental health, and to look at that and address that, and to try and shape some culture change, and also put in place provisions where people have got resources, and to enable productions, studios, broadcasters, cinemas to have resources that they can also use for positive mental health in the workplace. So it's not just about people, but not just about freelancers, but it's actually about employers and how we can work with them to move forward with it.
That's very true. I mean, in terms of, things have changed, things like, I'm thinking of intimacy coaches and things like that, and the awareness of kind of, safe space and things like that within sets and within venues and things like that. So that kind of, those kind of steps are moving forward. But yeah, I mean, senior management and, the people who make decisions and CEOs need to make sure that those steps forward don't go back just because of the bottom line, or just because you want to save some money further on down the line or something like that.
And also there's lots of different elements of the whole picture programme. We will be looking at toolkits, kind of resources that are available, partnership work, lots of different areas to it, which will both impact positively on people working in the industry, but as you say, from grassroots upwards to senior levels of studios and broadcasters, etc. So trying to look at the whole picture, hence whole picture programme.
Obviously, this is the worst question to ask in a pandemic year, but what's your timescale in terms of the programme?
It's a 2-year programme. However, it will have a longer lasting legacy than that. I think in the short term, it's 2 years in terms of the objectives we've set, but it will go beyond that timescale. And then obviously, it will have a lasting legacy as well.
Okay. Doug, one last question to you before we just wrap up is the question about young people. I mean, we've been going with the Film Audience Network for 7 or 8 years, and we talk about young people, how we can get them into the cinema, how we can engage with them, all that sort of stuff. Is that also a problem for unions about getting young people to engage?
Yes, definitely. There's unions have been, as it were, unfashionable, as you pointed out earlier, since the 70s. They kind of got themselves a bit of a bad name, and young people, as a consequence, are like a generation behind. So people of my generation, I was a member of the National Union of Students, for example. I mean, it was a given that you joined a trade union when you started working. That's completely disappeared now. So when I do my talks around young people and go to colleges and speak to students and things as well, there's quite a lot of people actually ask me what a trade union is and what does it do. So it's like, as an organiser, I have to go back absolutely to ground zero and start from the very beginning. What is a trade union? What is it about? What is the point of a trade union? Somebody at a recent event said to me, I thought it was a brilliant line, and I'm going to use it forward, is if it wasn't for trade unions, you wouldn't have a weekend. Yeah. There would be no such thing, and I just thought that's wonderful. I will definitely going to use that. So it's just getting across to younger people the importance of being in a trade union and the strength and being able to work together. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real issue because it isn't a given anymore. It's not. No. I mean, yeah, certainly when I joined the workforce. I mean, I think it was difficult as a performer. I suppose it's difficult because equity is so kind of prominent. But I don't know in terms of the percentages of actual active performers out there who are members of equity now. I'm not entirely, I suppose that's the kind of area of research in terms of who's joining, where, those kind of things. But
I'm aware that Equity's membership is very similar to BECTU, so they're round about the 50,000 mark as well. Right, okay. How that equates to the actual size of the industry, I really don't know.
It's problematic.
Jo touched on it earlier in her talk as well. I mean, film and television production in the United Kingdom over the last 15 years has been doing spectacularly well. Yeah. Compared to other size parts of industry out there. I mean, doing really, really well. And encouragingly going forwards, I mean, our analysis shows that 85% of film and television production is back to the new normal, as it were. There are a couple of feature films coming to Scotland early in the new year, and they're still coming. There's a whole number of features planned to be made within the M25 in London next year, and the word is that is still going to happen. The investment is still going to be made, so the work will be there. One of our worries is the impact on the viability of cinemas now that streaming has suddenly become everybody does it, as opposed to before the lockdown. Streaming was something that young people did, but now everybody does it.
Well, that is obviously something that we've been discussing a lot at the conference, and how young audiences, and also has been part of the Film Audience Network's work over the last few years, is to engage people. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's yes, streaming is there, but it's maybe something that actually can help in a strange sort of way in terms of that we'll learn to live with it and learn to work with it, just as cinemas did with video back in the 1980s, and there's a flexibility in cinema, and indefatigability, I suppose, is the right term as well.
Just experience for me. I'm such a massive lover of cinema, and I just don't think that can. Yes, it's convenient, but it can't replace experience. And hopefully that will translate with a younger generation of cinema goers, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, it's rebuilding confidence with the potential audience as well. That's really important. When just after the first lockdown, when cinema started opening up again, I mean, the audience figures were like 15%.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the financial model for a cinema compared to a theatre is quite different. So, I mean, the cinema can do 5 screenings in a day and squeeze a profit out of it that way, whereas theatres can't without, having a 75% plus audience. But it's getting the confidence back on the punter, if you like, to go back, to be brave enough to get on the public transport to go into town to attend a cinema with a lot of other people. At the moment, some folks
that the workers have done to make sure that they feel safe in what they do. Well, look, there is, I should note that Annabelle has noted on the chat that collective action can happen without unions as well. We should say that you can collectivize within your workplace, but the ability of a union to give you power and to give you oomph in your fight is second to none. Just Joe, if you could maybe just give us a rundown of how best people can engage with the charity, how they can get in contact.
Well, as I said, we've got our website, Film and TV Charity website, which you can find on Google. All of what I've talked about today is listed on there in some detail. So I would absolutely say that's the go-to place. In terms of the helpline, I'll give that number out. It's 0800 054 0000. That is 24 hours a day. It's free. It's confidential. People are going to find this Christmas potentially quite tough. People can't necessarily see each other. It's been a hard year. So I would, if people need to use that helpline, then, please do feel like you can access it.
That's what it's there for. Thank you, Joe. Doug, what's the best way for people to get in touch with BECTU then?
Well, if you go to the website, www.bectu.org.uk, there's a few links on there for putting in inquiries and stuff, or email membership@bectu.org.uk.
All right, okay.
That's a generic email account, but the membership centre goes through them all, allocates the query to the local organising official, depending what part of the country you're in, and they'll get in touch with they'll follow up and get in touch with the individuals and go through how we can support them and help them.
Good.
I would just say, Hugh, just before I sign off, the helpline, we can also signpost through that helpline as well. So if you've got a question that touches on legal advice, or you need access to counselling or a number of other things, then that's the number to go through as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we've run out of time, and it's been great, really fascinating discussion, and I'm really, really grateful to both of you for your time today. It's been really useful, and you're both, yes, Doug mentioned earlier on your overlap, but that at least gives us 2 safety nets as opposed to 1, which is a handy thing. So thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks very much.